Well, Ubisoft have finally gone and remade one of the most popular games of all time with Assassin's Creed Black Flag Desynced, putting you into the boots of Edward Kenway, that highly likeable pirate rogue with a heart of gold, living in the early 1700s, chasing money, status, and floating sea shanties. Rubbing shoulders with real-world figures like Blackbeard the Pirate and Charles Vane, before unwittingly getting embroiled up in that centuries-old war between the Assassins and the Templars, going from being a bit directionless at the start there to evolving into a more serious and mature person, as the world he once knew becomes extinct around him.
Put your ambition to better use, Kenway.
Very few games manage to capture that feeling of just unrestrained freedom, where you can quite literally find yourself losing hours of daylight as you explore the map and forge your own path, being genuinely quite funny at times.
Anyone speak English? English!
Little bit.
But then also ending on a very somber and poignant dramatic note, reminding us that nothing lasts forever. And if there's a better example of fictional media capturing what it feels like to go from being in your 20s to your 30s, well, I've yet to see it. Anyway, there's a reason why it's one of the most popular games in the series, and it makes perfect sense as to why Ubisoft had chosen to remake it first, even though, realistically, they probably should have started with the earlier entries. And it's a good thing in that they're remaking one of the most popular games in the series, but then it's also kind of a bad thing, because the expectations for this are just going to be insanely high.
You got that straight.
Either way though, Black Flag Resynced is almost here, due for release later in July. However, I did get to play an early build a couple of weeks ago, getting invited to an event in Singapore where I got to sit down in a maximum security facility and play through it for about 3 or so hours. Experiencing that opening hour or so set in Havana before then being able to free roam a bit and then play through one of the later missions set during Sequence 6. And after playing it, I definitely have thoughts, let's put it that way. Just something to mention as well, in that while a lot of this is my own footage that I played myself, I didn't have any control over the visual settings or the capture setup they used. As far as I know, we were playing this on a PC with an RTX 5080 at 4K resolution and recording it with OBS, which ain't my first choice so far as capture goes. Plus, I have no idea what graphical settings outside of ray tracing were even enabled. And I don't know if people are going to hear it either, but there is a lot of weird glitches when it comes to the audio, which I'm guessing is due to whatever setting they were using in OBS. Because I didn't hear any of this when I was actually playing the game, where for the most part, that preview build seemed to run and sound pretty smooth. Oh yeah, and that's the other thing that I want to mention, in that this was a preview build. Yes, a preview. This game is still unfinished, meaning this video is not a review or any kind of full indication of what the final game is going to be like. And you'd think that I wouldn't even have to mention that a preview build a couple of months out from a game's release doesn't count as an actual review. But, you know, due to past events, here we are. Finally, I will also say that this is not a sponsored video. I've not been given money to talk about this or anything like that either. I sat down and played this in the same room and the same manner as the other couple dozen people at the event.
You got that?
Anyway, let's crowd on every inch of sail, set a course for Nassau, and see what the whole thing's about, shall we? Right, so for people who played the original game, all of this is going to seem very familiar, as it is for the most part a beat-for-beat remake. Starting with Edward in Havana for the first few missions, as he assumes the identity of a former assassin, and works with the Templars unwittingly before then soon taking control of the Jackdaw and seeking after that mythical observatory that he believes hold riches that can earn him an early retirement. And if you are familiar with the old game, or really just any Assassin's Creed game, then the controls, the movement, and the mechanics are going to click again pretty quickly. The first thing you might notice though is how they've completely changed the heads-up display, doing away with that old minimap and replacing it with a far less intrusive compass at the top of the screen, which is basically just the one they had in Shadows carried across, with the idea being, I guess, that it somehow makes the screen less cluttered. They've also included that auto-follow feature during certain missions as well, meaning you can now just walk alongside NPCs automatically, which is an objectively good change. And it really did used to kind of piss me off in the old games how you'd have to manually walk around all the time. Also too, because other characters would move at a pace where they weren't quite running, but they also weren't matching your walking speed either, meaning you'd have to keep stopping to let them get ahead or catch up.
I can't believe the shite I'm hearing drop from your lips.
So either way, like, that simple inclusion of the auto-follow feature fixes this stuff so you can focus on listening to what they're talking about, which is the entire point of those sequences anyway.
Piss off, Ben!
Another good change is that they've gotten rid of those sections outside of the Animus entirely.
Thank you!
replacing them with those optional riffs from Shadows, which is again a good thing. Because let's be honest, those Abstergo sequences sucked ass. And getting pulled out of this plundering pirate power fantasy to be forced to slowly walk around a corporate office and hack into computers was just an insane speed bump. I mean, at least in the prior games, it kinda made sense, given how all the present day stuff with Desmond was tied directly to the events in the past with Altair and Ezio. But yeah, like I never just cared much for that present day stuff in Black Flag. And all the cringy dialogue from those cliche corporate workers combined with these menial tasks just kinda felt like pointless filler.
Well, looks like Olivier wants to meet with you. It's exciting.
Other than that though, pretty much everything else is still in the game. You got the ship combat, the assassin contracts, and then harpooning whales, aka your mum. Reminding us again how someone at Ubisoft back then really liked that one boss fight in RE4.
He's a monster!
The main thing people are going to fixate on, it ain't the heads-up display or the new control scheme, it's the updated presentation. And at least visually, like as far as the environments go, this is an objective step up across the board. And some of the new areas here just look absolutely stunning, running on whatever version of the Anvil engine we're up to now. And yeah, it is kind of crazy to think that they're still more or less using the same engine from the first game. It's the kind of thing where it's like how your brain remembers what that original game looked like, when in reality it doesn't look like that at all. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like the original still looks great for the most part, but I do reckon that a lot of people are going to forget how rough around the edges it was in certain spots too. And Resynced seems to do a good job here of capturing that overall feel and vibe, recreating all those original environments and locations and just packing them with far more detail, to the point that it really starts to look like that old pre-rendered trailer.
Who makes a home on this godforsaken rock?
It's just a bit of a shame that we aren't allowed to show off any footage of the Havana sequence, which is odd because I thought that was the best looking areas.
Right.
Though I did get this bit during my preview where I was attacking a ship during a thunderstorm where it almost seemed like something out of a pre-recorded gameplay video, especially in the way that the lighting in the background almost seemed scripted.
Full sail! Full sail!
And in fact too, when you board ships now to take them over, you can even see all these little bits of flaming ember on the deck, really showing now just how much damage they've taken from cannon fire. It also includes a lot of similar visual effects to the stuff we got in Shadows when it comes to the wind and other weather. Like how after a heavy rainstorm, for instance, there's going to be puddles all over the ground. And if you wait long enough, they're even going to evaporate in real time. Where it does sort of trip up a bit is with some of the character models and the animations.
True.
With most of these returning characters looking really good and identical to the old game. But then with some of them, they just look like entirely different people. Anne, for instance, doesn't even really look like the same person anymore. And some of her, shall we say, proportions have also been adjusted a bit here too.
Dear lady, what do they call you?
And when they're sober, a jilt when they're sauced, but never lady.
Well, good lad.
But I think the best example though is with Blackbeard, and one cinematic in particular.
Thank you, Mr. Hans.
Now this was one of the more memorable cutscenes in the original game where Blackbeard's breaking down his whole mindset when it comes to charisma, intimidation, and how he projected himself on his enemies. It was animated well, it was voice acted well, then it gave us a really cool glimpse into the dude's whole persona and psyche.
Pleading for their lord before all else.
Oh god.
Here though in the remake though, it just doesn't seem to have the same impact and it looks far more muted. I mean, just compare the facial expressions in each version alone and you'll see what I mean. Like in the original, his face is scowling, his teeth are bare and jagged, and the light coming off those dynamite fuses is far more prominent, with a bunch of smoke billowing off them as well. Really capturing that transition from a normal man to this devil of the sea that he portrays himself as.
Looks fine.
Of course it does.
And this was something that I noticed a fair bit here, especially when you're watching a few of the newer cinematics, where there's like a noticeable difference in the animation overall.
So you said. You did keep me from hanging.
True.
But that doesn't mean you own me.
Also true.
Even just comparing how diving in the original game looks to the remake. Like in the original game, the water seemed a lot more murkier, with a more pronounced depth of field effect to really simulate how Edward's eyes could only see so far. Here though in the remake, it all just looks so clean and colourful, like it's an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. I don't know, like, at least if nothing else though, now when you're diving, you can actually dodge those incoming shark attacks. I will say as well that I don't think this is really unique to Black Flag either. If anything, I think it's more of a testament to just how good games actually looked back then. I mean, they might have been running on far inferior tech and all that stuff, but games back then also seemed to just have these far more distinct visual style. And you could look at a screenshot from 10 different titles and they'd all look completely unique.
It's true nonetheless.
It's not like a glaring issue, and I'd still say that overall this is a great looking title. But I don't know, like seeing it all now, it just kind of makes me nostalgic for the good old days of that long gone 7th generation aesthetic. As for all the gameplay stuff, well, Black Flag's mostly still broken down into 3 main areas. You've got the parkour and the free running stuff, you've got the stealth and the combat, and then finally all the naval warfare. With the latter being mostly the same, just outside of the ammo count now always being shown on the bottom left of the screen. And when you're firing the swivel cannon now, you only need to aim at the weak spot and then press the R1 button, compared to the OG where you had to hold down the triangle button for a couple of seconds and then release it, with I think this new method being far better. Other than that though, it's pretty easy to get right back into that rhythm of taking ships out and then boarding them. Where also like the original, when you do board a ship, all the other ones nearby are nice enough to stop attacking you until you're finished. And you can still cheese through entire convoys by repairing ships in between combat as well. You plunder ships for wood, metal, cloth, rum and sugar, and then get stuck in that constant loop of working towards your next upgrade. And I would have honestly spent the entire preview just buggering around with this mode alone. They've apparently added in new weapons and features here as well though, like for instance you can unlock the option to fire your heavy shot twice in a row, with there also being new crew members to hire as well, each having their own unique missions tied to their backstory. And the one we got to play in the preview is for a lady named Lucy who joins the Jackdaw as an officer after you break her out of captivity.
You make a fine argument. Lead on.
I know that a lot of people kind of found that ship combat to be pretty repetitive back in the day, but for me, like this aspect of Black Flag I've always found the most addictive. So I'm definitely keen to see how much more depth they've added to this with all these new crew members.
Your last mistake, mate.
As for the parkour and the free running, well, that stuff again seems to be mostly the same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. And I know that Ubisoft say that with every new entry, how they've done this, that, and the other thing when it comes to upgrading the movement controls to make it more seamless or whatever. Yeah, like, I'm sure they have, but I've just never really seen any massive change in any of these games in regards to all the free running. So, like, you know, running around here in Resynced in 2026, it feels exactly the same to me as it did back in 2013. In the sense that Edward does what I want him to do maybe 95% of the time, with it still being that frustrating 5% where he just seems to have his own agenda.
What an asshole.
They have included zip lines now to quickly zip around on, which is being hailed as a new feature, even though we've had zip lines in Ubisoft games since the original Splinter Cell.
Can you please stop making me feel old?
Though I do at least appreciate the inclusion of a dodge roll, which again, like, ain't exactly new, but is a much needed inclusion, and makes it a whole lot easier dealing with those incredibly annoying enemies with rifles. I mean, I hated those guys so much in the original that I would actively seek them out just to fucking kill them.
Fuck you!
And off the back of that, the stealth more or less feels identical as well, mostly based off line of sight, just with the added bonus now of being able to manually crouch, where before, Edward would only crouch when he was hiding in bushes. It's also got a similar approach now, where the time of the day affects how visible you are to enemies, where you can also now advance time to whenever you'd like, which is another handy feature returning from Shadows. Plus you're given the rope dart far earlier on here, compared to the original game where you didn't even get it until the second last sequence. Now it apparently unlocks in the third sequence, also being far more effective, able to really easily pull enemies towards you during combat or when you're trying to stealth around for a quick kill. So yeah, like overall, I'd say the stealth is perfectly functional without being much more than that. I mean, it's not like it's got chaos theory levels of complexity or anything like that, but it's simple and it's easy to get the hang of, which is all it ever needed to be.
Can you please stop making me feel old?
Where the biggest changes have been made though is how they've modified all the combat, and this is where I think it's really going to divide up a whole lot of people. Now, in the original game, combat was all about countering, because after you countered, you could usually clear out an entire group of bad guys by chaining instant kills across all of them, just popping from one guy to the next and taking them all out in a single hit. And while it was fun, it often wasn't very challenging, where, say for those few times when tougher opponents were in the mix, you could breeze through pretty much every fight, even if you were completely unarmed. In the remake, this has all been done away with, and it's a similar approach to the more modern entries, relying instead on parrying along with this whole posture and stamina system, with only a perfectly timed parry actually stunning an enemy, and then leaving them wide open for an instant takedown. And while you still can chain takedowns together, it's now far more limited, not to mention weapon dependent, where you might only be able to chain 1 or 2 together as opposed to 6 or 7. In fact, during this preview build, the weapon I had would only let me do 2 takedowns back to back. What I've also noticed too is that popping smoke bombs isn't just an instant kill for enemies either. Considering in the original, this was always a really effective strategy if you were outnumbered, where you could just pop a smoke bomb on the ground, crop dust everyone around you, leaving them wide open to an instant kill with any weapon. In the remake, while you still can drop smoke bombs and it does still stun them, they can't be killed by a single hit anymore. So basically, it's like what they tried to do here is just make the combat more skill dependent and situational, instead of letting the player rely on using the same 1 or 2 tactics over and over and cheese through every single encounter. Which is kind of ironic having said that though, because they've also given Kenway this sweep the leg move, which almost always knocks an enemy to the ground and lets you instantly just kill them anyway. Still though, I think I do appreciate this system more than forcing the player to level up like a bazillion times and gatekeeping all the best and effective moves behind hours and hours of game time. And it also helps that the weapons have been severely stripped back as well, replacing the dozen or so different categories with a far more simplified roster. You know, like the original did. However, if there is one thing they've definitely kept in this remake, it's the jank. And yeah, dog, like this thing is often incredibly janky. Especially during the moments when you're taking over ships, or even just going up against a bunch of enemies at once. As you see lots of weird animations as people all sort of jump around, jump up, and get down. Now, to be fair, the original was also guilty of this kind of thing as well. And again, like I do think that people are probably going to misremember just how janky that original actually was. However, that's not really a good argument given that came out in 2013. And the point of a remake, you know, at least as far as I know, is that they iron out this sort of stuff and improve it. It is kind of hard to tell though whether or not this stuff is happening because it's still a work in progress build, but either way, like this definitely stuck out to me as being one of the least refined aspects of the whole game. I also had a really hilarious thing happening to me during combat as well, where often after I'd hit someone, they'd often just go completely bald, as if Edward had smacked them so hard that their hair just completely vanished. And I'm not even sure if it's supposed to be a bug or it's an actual feature, because I do know that people back then did wear wigs. And if you slow the footage down enough and look real close, you can even see a wig flying off someone's head when they get hit. But in real time, this was much harder to spot, and it really looked like I was smacking someone so hard that I turned them into Walter White.
You got me.
The final thing worth mentioning is how they've reworked a lot of the missions, adding in new objectives or alternate approaches in certain sequences. For instance, with one of the missions about halfway through the game where you need to get a diving bell so you can head underwater and find medicine. And in the original, you just had to outright buy the diving bell with no other option. You know, just shell out a few thousand of your hard-earned dollary dues and pick this thing up. In the remake though, you've now got the option to go and speak to Adewale for an optional objective to head to a camp outside of town, where you conveniently find a diving bell you can steal.
I heard tell that they just came into possession of a bell themselves.
Completely bypassing having to spend your own money and getting it for free, you know, after you deal with the guys who are guarding it. Giving you this new approach if you want to spend less of your money and more of your time. Another example is that when I was trying to break into one of the game's many warehouses to get resources, finding the key sent me off on this whole side task, where I had to read notes and listen to conversations to find where the key had been left, with it being this whole story about someone feeding people to crocodiles out the back of the plantation, and the key being left on someone's corpse.
What a place to keep the bleeding warehouse key.
As opposed to just finding that one NPC who had the key and looting him, you know, as it used to be. Which is more interesting, though I do kind of wonder if that's going to get a bit tedious after the 10th or so time you've tried to raid a warehouse. I'd say that the worst missions in the original game, though, were all the ones where you slowly had to follow someone around and eavesdrop on their conversation or tell them to a specific location without getting spotted. The worst ones by far, though, were the ones where you had to follow another ship, which was also boring, but then even more so because you were also controlling the jackdaw.
Careful, Captain. We're drifting close to a watchtower.
So what they've done for these missions specifically is even add in new alternatives should you fail those tailing sections, or if you just want a more direct approach. And it's going to be interesting to see how they change those missions up, considering that they're by far the weakest aspects of the original. Not to mention there's also going to be this whole new epilogue sequence added in as well, with a brand spanking new 8 missions to get through.
I'll have a look.
So overall, I'd say I had a pretty good time playing through this whole preview build. To be honest though, I hardly think that 3 hours is even enough to gauge how good this thing's gonna be, considering that 3 hours of gameplay is barely scratching the surface of what these games have to offer. Especially with Black Flag in particular, which really took a while there before it truly started to cook. I mean, it's not even really until after you're a few hours in, you've gotten the jackdaw and made some hefty upgrades to it, along with getting items like the sleep and the berserk darts before it really takes off. So I guess my point is that a 3-hour preview isn't really going to be the best indicator.
I see that.
And it does seem that if nothing else, they are putting a lot of time and effort into making sure it's the best it can be. I don't know if I'm quite ready either to go through that emotional roller coaster we get in the last few sequences, but I'm absolutely ready to go around blowing up and boarding every single man-of-war ship I can find, along with cheesing my way through assassin contracts with the Berserk Dart and getting into fistfights at taverns. So in lieu of a Blood Dragon or Splinter Cell remake, this thing will do in the meantime. I guess we'll just have to wait until July now to see if they pull the whole thing off.